someone you love dies. And within hours, the calls start. The arrangements begin. The body goes somewhere. There are forms to fill out, a casket to choose, a date to set. You are handed a script you never asked for, and you follow it almost automatically. But here is the strange part. That script is ancient, far older than any religion, far older than any government, far older, in fact, than language itself. And the real story of what your ancestors did when death came is not what any textbook ever told you. Death has always been the one thing no human could ignore. You cannot walk past it. You cannot schedule it away. And for hundreds of thousands of years before coffins or churches or eulogies, your ancestors had to figure out what to do with a body, and with the grief that came with it. What they did tells you something profound about who you are right now. The oldest confirmed burial site ever found is in a cave in South Africa called Border Cave. Archaeologists there uncovered the deliberate burial of a young child, laid carefully in the earth, around 74,000 years ago. 74,000 years. That child was covered intentionally. A shell was placed beside the body. Someone made a choice, in that moment of loss, to not just leave, to mark it, to say, this person mattered, but that is not even the beginning. In 2015, a team led by paleoanthropologist Lee Berger announced one of the most unsettling discoveries in the history of human science. Deep in a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, they found hundreds of bones belonging to a species called Homo naledi, an ancient relative of yours. Smaller brain, curved fingers, powerful grip. What shocked researchers was not the species. It was the location. The bones were deep inside the cave system, in a chamber nearly impossible to reach without light and deliberate navigation. There were no predators in there. No flood had carried the bodies in. The only explanation that fit the evidence was that Homo naledi had been deliberately placing their dead in that chamber. Intentionally. On purpose. This was not Homo sapiens. The brain of Homo naledi was roughly 1/3 the size of yours. And yet something inside that smaller brain understood that death was different from everything else. That is the first counterintuitive truth. The impulse to honor the dead did not come from big brains or complex language or organized religion. It came from something far more fundamental, something that predates all of those things. The recognition that a person who existed now does not, and that this moment deserves more than silence. So what did ancient humans actually do? For the very earliest hominins, the evidence points to a range of behaviors that would feel deeply strange to you today. Bodies were sometimes left at specific sites, but not buried. Sometimes they were arranged. In Spain, the site called Cima de los Huesos, or Pit of Bones, contains the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals of the species Homo heidelbergensis, pushed down into a deep shaft roughly 430,000 years ago. One object was found with them, a single hand axe made of red quartzite. Archaeologist Juan Luis Arzuaga, who has spent decades studying this site, believes this was an intentional offering. The color red already carried meaning. The gesture already existed, 430,000 years ago. Then comes Neanderthals. For a long time, scientists dismissed the idea that Neanderthals grieved. They were seen as brutish, instinct-driven, incapable of symbolic thought. That view is now almost entirely overturned. At a site in Iraq called Shanidar Cave, archaeologist Ralph Solecki excavated in the 1950s and found the remains of a Neanderthal man buried in a shallow grave. Pollen samples taken from the grave appeared to show large clusters of flowering plants. Solecki argued the Neanderthal had been buried with flowers. His name for this individual was Shanidar IV, but he called the discovery evidence that Neanderthals were the first flower people. The interpretation has been debated since. Later researchers suggested the pollen may have arrived through other means. But the debate itself reveals how uncomfortable scientists have been with the idea that Neanderthals mourned. Because if they did, then grief is not a modern invention. It is an inheritance. What is no longer debated is that Neanderthals buried their dead deliberately. Multiple sites across Europe confirm this. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a Neanderthal was found in a pit that appears to have been intentionally dug. The body was placed in a specific position. There is no accident here. There is intention. Your ancestors, Homo sapiens, took everything further. Once the archaeological record reaches the Upper Paleolithic, roughly 50,000 years ago onward, the richness of burial practices explodes. Bodies are covered in red ochre, a mineral pigment that required processing and preparation. Red may have symbolized blood, life, fire, the sun. Whatever it meant something. The dead were adorned with beads made of shells and animal teeth. They were given tools. They were placed with their knees drawn up to their chests, in what looks unmistakably like sleep. Researchers like archaeologist Ian Davidson have argued that this fetal positioning reflects a belief in continuation, that the dead were being prepared for something, not just discarded. At a site in Russia called Sung-Hir, dated to around 34,000 years ago, 2 children were buried head to head, their bodies covered in thousands of mammoth ivory beads. The beads alone would have taken an estimated 10,000 hours to produce. 10,000 hours for the burial of 2 children. Someone, or many someones, poured the labor of an entire year into honoring the dead. This was not practical. This was not survival. This was love made visible. And then there is something even stranger, something that is rarely discussed. Not all ancient cultures buried their dead. Some ate them. This is the part people flinch at. But the evidence is real and it is widespread. In a cave in England called Gough's Cave, dated to around 15,000 years ago, human bones were found that had been intentionally defleshed, cracked for marrow, and shaped into cups. Researchers Francesco De Rico and Silvia Bello, who analyzed the bones extensively, concluded this was not starvation cannibalism. The care taken with the bones, the deliberate shaping of skulls into vessels, suggests something ritualistic, something that meant something to the people performing it. The dead were being incorporated, literally consumed, brought inside. This practice, called mortuary cannibalism, has been documented in cultures around the world and across enormous spans of time. The 4 people of Papua New Guinea practiced it into the 20th century. They ate their dead as an act of respect and grief. The idea was not to destroy, it was to preserve, to take the person you loved inside yourself so they would never fully leave. When you sit with that for a moment, it is not so alien. You understand the impulse, even if the method horrifies you. You want the people you lose to stay. You want them to remain part of you. The method changes. The need does not. Fire also appears early. Cremation, the deliberate burning of a body, is one of the oldest documented burial practices in the world. In Australia, the remains of a woman called Mungo Lady, found at Lake Mungo, show evidence of cremation dated to approximately 40,000 years ago. She is the oldest known cremation in the world. Someone built a fire. Someone placed her body in it. Someone then gathered the burned remains, crushed them, and buried them. 3 distinct deliberate acts. This was not disposal. This was ceremony. What all of this evidence points to is something that archaeologist and cognitive scientist Colin Renfrew has called the threshold of modernity, the moment when humans began treating the world as symbolic, when things stopped being just things and started meaning something. And death, it turns out, may have been the first classroom for that lesson. Grief forced your ancestors to confront time, to understand that something that was here is now not here, that the future is different from the past, that a person exists and then does not. And from that confrontation came the very first seeds of what you now call meaning. The grave was the first altar. The burial was the first ritual. And the act of marking death was, in some profound sense, the act of becoming human. Here is something researchers like psychologist Thomas Attig have noted about modern grief. When you lose someone, you do not grieve only the person. You grieve the future you imagined with them. You grieve their absence from everything that has not happened yet. You carry them forward in you, in memory, in habit, in the way you hear a song or smell something familiar. You keep them inside you, which is, if you think about it, not so different from what happened at Guff's Cave 15,000 years ago. The method is different. The need is the same. You are not separate from those ancient people in the cave. You are downstream from them. The grief you feel is the same grief. The need to mark death, to do something in the face of it, to not simply walk away, that impulse did not begin with you or your culture or your religion. It is older than all of those things. It is built into you at a depth that language barely reaches. Tonight, if you hear about someone dying, something will happen in your body before you even think. A pause, a wait, a pull toward doing something, saying something, marking it in some way. That is not civilization. That is not custom. That is 74,000 years of your ancestors in a cave, placing a shell beside a child, refusing to pretend it did not matter. You were always going to feel this. The only thing that changed is what you do next.